Liverpool owner John W. Henry is a man of few words. He rarely gives interviews, releases public statements, or communicates with Liverpool fans. Since July 2020, over 3 years ago, Henry has sent a grand total of 3 tweets. One a photograph of Fenway Park, home of the Boston Red Sox, another sports team that Henry owns, presented without comment, a quote tweet which read "Never forgotten" in memory of Liverpool fans killed in the Hillsborough disaster, and one which read "Congratulations to a great newspaper serving our community after the Boston Globe," which he also owns, won its 27th Pulitzer Prize in 2021. In fact, if it wasn't for his grovelling apology video after the European Super League, which was initially backed by Henry and Liverpool, fell flat on its face, most of us probably wouldn't even know what he sounded like. Yet, in July 2013, just over a decade ago, the usually silent venture capitalist at the top of Liverpool felt compelled to send a tweet to his hundreds of thousands of followers asking, quote, "What do you think they're smoking over there at Emirates?" Horrific grammar, I know. Henry was 63 years old at the time. The tweet was in reference to the breaking news, leaked to the press by Liverpool, that Arsenal had bid £41 million for Luis Suárez. No, not £41 million, not £401 million, it was 2013, but £40 million plus £1. Henry was reportedly apoplectic when he was informed of the bid, while holidaying in the Bahamas, considering it to be insulting and a provocation on the part of Arsenal, who he had previously considered to be a classy club, and he had enjoyed, up to that point, a good relationship with the Gunners' chief executive, Ivan Gazidis. To make matters worse for Liverpool, Suarez was keen to leave, and Arsenal had been encouraged to make the bid that had outraged Henry so much by Suarez's agent, Pere Guardiola, who is the brother of a high-profile football manager. I'll let you all just take a wild stab at guessing which one. That's right, Sam Allardyce. No, not really, it's Pep. What am I like? In the intervening decade, the tale of Arsenal's ill-fated bid for Suarez has become the stuff of legend, often used to illustrate a sort of haplessness that defined the Gunners' transfer negotiations during what is sometimes referred to as the club's banter era, and played a key role in their gradual demise. Yet, if, as it is often reported, Suarez did indeed have a £40 million release clause in his contract at Liverpool, then surely it isn't that outlandish at all. And if that was the case, how come Liverpool weren't forced to accept it? Well, 10 years on from the failed bid, funnily enough on transfer deadline day 2023, I wanted to take a look back at Arsenal's Suarez bid, the fallout from it, the potential what-ifs had it actually materialised, and why it might just be the most important Premier League transfer that never happened. In the summer of 2013, English football looked a little bit different to how it does now. Manchester United had just bounced back from missing out on the title on goal difference to win their 5th Premier League title in the past 7 seasons by a whopping 11 points. Manchester City had failed to defend their title, but had reaffirmed their status as one of the big boys now by finishing as runners-up. Chelsea had finished 3rd, won their 2nd successive major trophy in Europe, and brought Jose Mourinho back to the club. And Arsenal, though far from their early 2000s peak, had qualified for the Champions League under Arsene Wenger for the 16th season on the bounce. Spurs, meanwhile, finished just 1 point behind the Gunners in 5th, as Gareth Bale very nearly carried the club into the Champions League. 2 places and a whole 11 points below Spurs, or 28 points behind Manchester United, was Liverpool in 7th. Below their Merseyside rivals Everton, but above Swansea and West Brom, so I suppose that's something. It was the 4th successive season in which Liverpool had failed to finish in the top 5, let alone the top 4. And all of a sudden, the albatross of never having won a top-flight league title during the Premier League era was replaced by anxieties surrounding when the club might return to the Champions League, a tournament which they have won more times than any other English club. That was an anxiety perhaps felt most acutely of all by Liverpool's star man, Luis Suárez. Liverpool had pulled off a coup signing Suarez in the first place 2.5 years earlier, especially for a fee of just £22.8 million. The previous season, Suarez scored 49 goals and made 24 assists in only 48 games at Ajax. He rightly won the Dutch Footballer of the Year award, and he was touted with moves to some of Europe's biggest clubs. It was only the stench of scandal that seemed to follow Suarez wherever he went, and one controversy in particular that convinced the likes of Bayern Munich and Barcelona that Suarez perhaps wasn't worth the hassle, causing them to look elsewhere and opening up the door for Liverpool. 2 months before joining Liverpool, and 6 months after his infamous red card for denying a certain Uruguay goal with a handball at the 2010 World Cup, Suarez bit PSV's Otman Bakkal, for which he was suspended for 2 matches and earned the unenviable nickname the Cannibal of Ajax within the Dutch press. Suarez's status as damaged goods was a godsend for Liverpool though, who signed a man who averaged 1.5 goal contributions a game the previous season and had scored 111 goals in 159 games for Ajax in total, for about a third less than they had paid to sign Andy Carroll on the very same day. Suarez had his apprehensions about joining Liverpool, given their recent issues and lack of Champions League football, but he was well aware of his reputation, lack of options, and the shop window that starring in the Premier League could provide. Liverpool's new owners, John W. Henry's sporting conglomerate, then known as New England Sports Ventures and now Fenway Sports Group, sold Suarez a vision of Liverpool returning to the Champions League, playing a vibrant brand of attacking football with him as their talisman and competing for the biggest prizes. Suarez was sold on the idea, but in the event that things didn't quite work out like that, he wanted assurances that he would be able to move on. A controversial and later disputed clause, therefore, and we will come back to the contentions, believe me, was inserted into his deal. As far as Suarez was concerned, it was a win-win. He had increased his wages substantially, he was playing in a bigger and better league for an ambitious club, and he had an easy route out if at any stage Liverpool failed to meet his ambitions. Immediately, things got off to a bad start. When Suarez arrived at Melwood, Liverpool's training ground, to sign on the dotted line on transfer deadline day in January 2011, he literally passed Fernando Torres, the man who he was supposed to partner up front at Anfield, on his way out. Partnering Torres had been a major pull factor for Suarez, and not only did his exit remove that opportunity, it significantly dented Liverpool's prospects of qualifying for the Champions League. Suarez hadn't even signed for Liverpool yet, but already he was beginning to wonder if the club was as ambitious as he had been led to believe. Keen to assuage those concerns, which were by no means exclusive to Suarez, the Reds went out and signed Andy Carroll from Newcastle United for £35 million. To describe the signing, and particularly the fee that Liverpool paid for Carroll as a panic buy, would be doing it a disservice. This wasn't so much a panic buy, it was positively hysterical. Even now, paying £35 million for a striker who had enjoyed one decent season in the Championship and one, admittedly, excellent half-season in the Premier League would seem like risky business. At the time, it was mind-boggling. Adjusted for football-specific inflation, it is one of the most expensive Premier League transfers of all time and would be equivalent to a fee of somewhere in the region of £80 million in 2023. Suarez endured a difficult debut half-season at Anfield, in which he only showed glimpses of what was to come, and Liverpool finished 6th in the Premier League, 10 points off Champions League qualification. Suarez didn't feel that Andy Carroll was a suitable strike partner for him, given their contrasting styles. He wasn't entirely convinced that Kenny Dalglish was capable of improving either him or the team as a whole, and Liverpool's summer signings, well, they didn't exactly inspire much confidence. By the summer of 2013, Suarez was individually considered to be one of the best players in the Premier League, but Liverpool looked miles off competing at the level that he wanted to be at. In his 2.5 years at Anfield, the Reds had finished 6th, 8th and 7th. in the 2012-13 season, in which Suarez had scored 30 goals in all competitions, won the Liverpool Player of the Year award, and made the PFA Premier League Team of the Year, Liverpool still didn't come close to qualifying for the Champions League. They were knocked out by Zenit St. Petersburg in the round of 16 of the Europa League, and by Oldham Athletic and Swansea City in the fourth round of the FA and League Cups. Just as had been the case at Ajax, though, while Suarez was excelling in terms of his performances, controversy was never too far behind. In the 2011-12 season, Suarez was found guilty of racially abusing Manchester United fullback Patrice Evra, for which he was punished with an 8-match suspension. Suarez refused to apologise to Evra at the time, and refused to even shake his hand the next time that the two teams met. Suarez responded, admirably it must be said, by apologising for his behaviour and promised that it wouldn't happen again. I'm just kidding, of course he didn't. He actually responded by publicly announcing his intention to leave Liverpool and the Premier League as a whole, citing the English press as the reason that he wanted out, and claiming that they were out to get him. Far be it from me to defend the English press, it is hard to imagine a more loathsome and incestuous gang of amoral creeps, but Suarez had, by that stage, served 2 lengthy bans in English football, one for using racist abuse, and one for biting someone for the second time in his career already. I'm not saying that he brought it upon himself, but, of course, that is exactly what I'm saying. There was a second, all the more pertinent reason why Suarez wanted to leave Liverpool though, and that's because he was very good at football and they weren't. It was widely reported at the time that Barcelona and Real Madrid were keeping tabs on Suarez, and he spent the entire summer telling anyone who'd listen that he was available and wanted to leave, and particularly how keen he was on joining Madrid. So much so that Los Blancos' president, Florentino Perez, was asked by the press whether the club would try to sign him. Perez described himself as a fan of Suarez's, but said that he was also a fan of his compatriot Edinson Cavani and Borussia Dortmund star Robert Lewandowski, refusing to be drawn on whether his personal admiration for Suarez's talents were likely to result in a concrete transfer offer from Real Madrid. Once again, it seemed as though Suarez's behaviour, and we can't really call it off-field issues, can we, because both his racist abuse and fondness for biting people happened on the pitch, had sowed the seeds of doubt in the minds of Europe's elite. One man, perhaps unusually, given the way in which he obsessed about the character of his signings, who hadn't been put off by Suarez's repeated indiscretions, was Arsene Wenger. As Liverpool languished in 7th, behind even their Merseyside rivals, there were lots of positive noises coming out of the Emirates in the summer of 2013. The Gunners had been on a very gradual downward trajectory, you could argue, for the past 9 years, following their last Premier League title in 2004. Since moving to the Emirates, Arsenal had operated on a smaller budget than any of their rivals, and though Wenger had been able to maintain their Champions League status, Arsenal no longer challenged for either the Champions League or the Premier League title in truth. In the summer of 2013, though, even Gazidis, with the backing of Arsenal's owners, was keen to change all of that. A boisterous Gazidis boasted early in the window that Arsenal, if they wanted to, had the resources to sign one-to-a Manchester United star Wayne Rooney, during the same summer that Alex Ferguson retired from the sport. It was a window in which the Gunners were keen to assert themselves, believing that, with the right business, they could propel their way back to the top table of English football. Following a season in which Theo Walcott was the Gunners' top scorer from the right wing with just 14 Premier League goals, a new centre-forward was high up their priority list. Personal terms had already been agreed with Real Madrid's Gonzalo Higuain, and Arsenal were ready to sign off on the deal. But Wenger felt uncomfortable about the €45 million transfer fee. Wenger felt as though it was excessive for a player who didn't really start games for Real Madrid, and when Luis Suárez's agent Pere Guardiola got in touch to inform him of a £40 million release clause in his client's contract, Wenger's ears pricked up. He slammed the brakes on the Higuain deal, temporarily at least, and turned his attention to Suarez instead. Arsenal made an initial bid of £30 million for Suarez, plus £5 million in future add-ons, which was swiftly rejected by Liverpool, as Arsenal expected that it would be. As well as rejecting the bid, Liverpool told Arsenal that they also wouldn't consider a bid of £40 million for Suarez. At that point, Arsenal didn't know exactly what the clause in Suarez's contract stipulated. They were acting on the advice of Pere Guardiola, and since there wasn't exactly an open line of communication with Liverpool at this stage, who maintained that Suarez wasn't for sale, they decided to at least put the theory to test, defying what they had been told by Liverpool, and bidding £40 million plus £1. At the time, it was reported that the fabled clause in Suarez's contract only dictated that Liverpool had to inform Suarez if anyone were to bid in excess of £40 million. Effectively, it was a clause that gave Suarez some insight into the interest in him and allowed him to try and force the remove once a bid had been made. Suarez's understanding of the clause appeared to be quite different though. As far as he was concerned, if Liverpool didn't qualify for the Champions League, which they hadn't, and a club that was in the Champions League bid more than £40 million for him, which Arsenal were and had, then Liverpool had to accept. Clearly, Suarez's understanding of the clause was wrong, however, as Liverpool rejected the bid. Or was it? Speaking at MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, which sounds like a barrel of laughs, in 2014, John W. Henry told the audience, and I quote, "Luis Suarez is the top scorer in the English Premier League, which is arguably the top soccer league in the world, and I don't know what degree I should go into this, but he had a buyout clause of £40 million, more than $60 million, and so Arsenal, one of our prime rivals, in fact, I think we're tied for second right now, or I guess we're actually second because of a goal difference, but Arsenal's third. They offered £40 million and £1 for him and triggered his buyout clause. What we found over the years is that contracts don't seem to mean a lot in England. Actually, not in England, in world football. It doesn't matter how long a player's contract is, he can decide when he's leaving. We sold a player, Fernando Torres I think, for £50 million, that we did not want to sell but we were forced to. So for the first time, I think, we took the position that we weren't selling, and since apparently these contracts don't seem to hold, we took the position that we're just not selling." End quote. There are no two ways about it, listening to that or reading the transcript. John Henry admits that Suarez had a £40 million buyout clause in his contract, and that Liverpool broke contract law in rejecting Arsenal's bid, on the grounds that they didn't think contracts meant much because they had been burnt in the case of Fernando Torres. Of course, Torres' Liverpool contract did mean something. Sure, players sign 5-year deals and demand a move in one sometimes, but if Liverpool rejected all of Chelsea's bids, much as he might have created a stink, Torres would still have been contracted to Liverpool. John Henry's account seemed to fly in the face of everyone else, perhaps other than Suarez himself's understanding of the clause. Pere Guardiola never seemed convinced that it was actually a buyout clause. Arsenal were very much sceptical themselves. The press considered it a "you have to tell him" clause, and it has since been described as a SOP, a meaningless concession that was made to Suarez in initial negotiations, but which had little practical meaning in writing. Either everyone else is wrong and Henry is right, and, somewhat ironically, it is his own account that would appear to portray him in the worst light, or he was just wanting to impress a load of other rich people at a rich people conference with an anecdote that he thought would amuse them. While he was talking, Henry sort of laughed a few times and looked for approval from the crowd, who also had a good chuckle when he said that he found contracts didn't seem to mean a lot in football. It's the way he tells them, I'm afraid. I just haven't got his delivery skills. Personally, I lean towards the idea that Henry was exaggerating to impress people, rather than everyone else being wrong and him actually breaking contract law, but I'll let you make your own minds up on that one. Just as they had with their £35 million bid, Arsenal fully expected the £40 million and £1 bid to be rejected, but they didn't anticipate the angry response that it would evoke from Liverpool. Arsenal's transfer chief Dick Law wanted the bid to open up a dialogue between the two clubs, signal to Suarez that Arsenal was serious, and get Liverpool around the table for negotiations. Instead, it infuriated Henry and Liverpool, who saw it as a provocation and an attempt to disrupt their star man, only hardening their resolve and strengthening their stance that he wasn't for sale. From that point on, Liverpool refused to even entertain talks with Arsenal. Nonetheless, if Arsenal's aim was to disrupt Suarez, which it most likely was to a certain extent, it was mission accomplished. Arsenal weren't the Uruguayan's first choice of destination. He really had his heart set on leaving England and on one of the two La Liga giants, but as far as he was concerned, the bid had met a threshold that should at least have put the ball in his court and allowed him to talk directly to Arsenal. And now that it hadn't, he had absolutely no faith that it would be any different if the bid was from Bayern Munich, Barcelona or Real Madrid. Suarez was so angered and determined to leave that he even asked to fly out to the United States to make his position clear to John Henry in person. That request was denied, as were pretty much all of Suarez's requests, and at a press conference the following day, Brendan Rodgers denied that Liverpool had broken any promises to Suarez and said that the player had shown, quote, total disrespect to the club. At this point, the relationship between Suarez and Liverpool hit rock bottom. Suarez was still banned and had another 7 games of his suspension to serve before he could return, but Rodgers exiled him from the first team entirely. At Melwood, Suarez was forced to train alone, with a single fitness coach, always at least 2 pitches away from where the main first team training was taking place. Sometimes, Suarez wouldn't even be permitted to train until after the first team was done and were off the pitch entirely. It was a bitter feud which engulfed the club just weeks before the start of the new season. While all of this was going on, Gonzalo Higuain joined Napoli for €40 million. Real Madrid had grown tired of Arsenal's stalling. Now Wenger had to pin all of his centre-forward hopes on Suarez when Liverpool were refusing even to speak to Arsenal. Pere Guardiola had made Arsenal aware of Suarez's potential contract demands, and the Gunners were all too happy to agree to them. It was just a matter of agreeing a fee with Arsenal. Contrary to what people might think, clause or no clause, Arsenal weren't actually a million miles away from Liverpool's valuation. A bid in excess of £50 million would have seriously tested Liverpool's resolve. Brendan Rodgers publicly spoke of the £55.6 million that PSG paid to sign Suarez's compatriot Edinson Cavani that summer, stating that he considered Suarez to be in the same bracket as Cavani and worth a similar fee. At the same time, however, Liverpool really didn't want to sell Suarez to a Premier League rival, and Arsenal's interests now seemed to be about more than Suarez alone. Following 4 seasons outside of the Champions League, selling Suarez to Arsenal would effectively have been an admission on Liverpool's part that Arsenal were a bigger club with more pull than Liverpool, and as much as that might have been true at the time, it wasn't a reality that Henry was readily keen to accept. Following a lengthy and morose standoff between Liverpool and Suarez, it was club captain Steven Gerrard who acted as a mediator and brought Suarez back into the fold. Gerrard was 33 years old, and whether he knew it or not at the time, the 2013-14 campaign was to be his penultimate season at Anfield. Like everyone else, he was well aware that Suarez was by far the best player at the club, and that without him, his last couple of years at Liverpool were unlikely to yield Champions League football, let alone an elusive Premier League title. Gerrard convinced Suarez, just about, that Arsenal wasn't the move that he really wanted, and that although Real Madrid and Barcelona had been linked, there wasn't anything firm on the table from either club. Gerrard's compromise offer to Suarez was that if he gave Liverpool just one last brilliant season and managed to avoid biting or racially abusing anyone, either Barca or Madrid would come calling in 12 months' time, and Liverpool would give him their blessing and let him leave. Rodgers and Liverpool, fairly reluctantly, agreed to Gerrard's compromise, throwing in a hefty pay rise for good measure, and Suarez returned to first-team training. Arsenal, meanwhile, were left with their tail between their legs. Having been so brash and boastful at the start of the summer, they had missed out on Suarez and Higuain and were left scrambling with Yaya Sanogo and Mathieu Flamini on free transfers as their only summer business that they had actually managed to get done. In the end, the Gunners reopened talks with Real Madrid and made Mesut Ozil their marquee signing for a club record £42.5 million, more than Arsenal had ever bid for Suarez, and Ozil also had significantly higher wage demands than the Uruguayan, owing to his time and success at Real Madrid. Arsenal's transfer chief Dick Law later conceded that, for less money, given the total compensation of the transfer fee, agents' fees, salary, bonuses, etc., Arsenal most likely could have signed Suarez for less money, or at least the same amount that they ended up paying for Ozil. The following season, Arsenal got off to an excellent start. They led the Premier League table for most of the season and were still top of the league by the end of January 2014. Liverpool, meanwhile, sat in fourth, but both teams' fortunes were about to turn. An injury to Aaron Ramsey, who was enjoying the season of his life at the time, and an injured Kim Källström on loan from Spartak Moscow, constituting Arsenal's only piece of January transfer business, came as a hammer blow to their title prospects. The Gunners went on a run of just one win from 6 games from the beginning of March onwards, falling to 4th by the end of the season, 7 points behind title winners Manchester City. Arsenal's defence conceded only 4 more goals than Man City's and 9 fewer than Liverpool's. But whilst Man City and Liverpool scored 102 and 101 goals that season, Arsenal only managed 68. It was a lack of goals and the lack of a true goal-scoring centre-forward which put paid to Arsenal's Premier League title aspirations. With 16 goals, Olivier Giroud was the Gunners' top scorer in the league. Luis Suárez, meanwhile, despite missing the first 5 games of the season while serving a suspension, scored 31 goals in 33 Premier League games, none of which were penalties. It remains a record for the most non-penalty goals scored in a Premier League season, held jointly with Mohamed Salah in the 2017-18 season, who played 3 extra games. Liverpool were true to their word, this time around at least, in the summer of 2014, allowing Suarez to join Barcelona for a fee of almost £65 million. Over the summer, Suarez bit someone again. The move made Suarez the 4th most expensive footballer of all time, trailing only Cristiano Ronaldo, Neymar and Gareth Bale, the latter duo having been signed as marquee signings by Barcelona and Real Madrid ahead of him the previous summer. Suarez went on to score 195 goals and made 113 assists in 283 games for Barcelona, where he won 13 trophies in 6 seasons and not only played in the Champions League but won it. In the 2015-16 season, Suarez interrupted Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi's decade-long stronghold on the La Liga Golden Boot and the European Golden Shoe, as he scored 59 goals and made 24 assists in 53 appearances in what was one of the most prolific goal-scoring campaigns in the history of European football. That is 7 more goals and 15 more assists than Erling Haaland managed in the same number of games last season. The £40 million and £1 bid for Suarez has entered Arsenal folklore and came to define, in a lot of people's eyes, Arsenal's so-called banter era and demise, as the club routinely lowballed in transfer negotiations only to end up with egg on their face. In reality, given the information that they had received from Pere Guardiola, they were just looking to test the clause in Suarez's contract and, by Liverpool's own admission, they weren't that far off reaching their asking price, and if you believe John Henry, contractually, Liverpool ought to have been forced to accept the bid. Nonetheless, it did speak to a certain truth about Arsenal's short-sightedness at times, and how being cheap did indeed sometimes come back to bite them. If they had just stumped up the £55 million fee for Suarez that Liverpool wanted, in a deal that would have cost them a similar amount overall to what they paid for Mesut Ozil, the likelihood is that would have won them at least an extra 7 points in the 2013-14 season, and would therefore have brought with it the Premier League title. Ozil had his moments at Arsenal, but he never had the consistent individual match-winning capabilities that Suarez illustrated, perhaps more so than any other player in the history of the division in the 2013-14 Premier League season. In that scenario, Arsene Wenger's legacy is resurrected, perhaps he would still be at the club now, Manchester City would have been denied a second Premier League title, Liverpool might never have returned to the Champions League, or not for a while at least, the MSN strike partnership at Barcelona possibly would never have happened, and had Suarez still been at Arsenal, Leicester City would surely have struggled to win their remarkable 2015-16 Premier League title. For Liverpool, meanwhile, whether they broke contract law or not, that small matter, their handling of Suarez, as was not always the case, proved to be a masterstroke. Arsenal's interest threatened to greatly diminish Liverpool's standing and reputation, and act as a humiliation. Instead, by making Arsenal's unusual bid public, while holding firm, it was Arsenal who people perceived as having been humiliated, and as being unserious operators within the transfer market. In the decades since, Liverpool have won both the Premier League and the Champions League, meanwhile Arsenal, though they look in healthy shape right now, have won neither, and have failed to qualify for the Champions League on 6 occasions. Football is a game of fine margins, and in such moments, decades can be defined. That is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, as I say, it goes without saying really, doesn't it? But make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens, and indeed my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, and all of those links should be in my link tree, if that's what it's called, down in the description below.